There is a war happening right now that most Americans do not fully understand, and buried inside it is a secret that changes everything about how we should read this conflict. The United States and Israel launched a military campaign against Iran. That part made headlines. But what did not make headlines, what was quietly confirmed by 3 intelligence officials speaking under condition of anonymity to the Washington Post, is that Russia has been feeding Iran the locations of American warships and aircraft operating in the Middle East. Since the very first day of this war, the Kremlin has been passing targeting data to Tehran, real-time intelligence, coordinates, positions of American assets that Iran could then aim at. Think about what that means for a moment. This is not a proxy war in the traditional sense anymore. This is a situation where one nuclear-armed rival of the United States is actively helping another adversary shoot at American soldiers. 6 American troops were killed on a Sunday in Kuwait, struck by Iranian attack drones. The Iranians launched thousands of one-way attack drones and hundreds of ballistic missiles at American military positions, embassies, and civilian targets across the region. And now we know that at least some of those strikes, the precise ones, the ones that hit early warning radars and command and control infrastructure with unsettling accuracy, may have been guided in part by Russian satellite intelligence. That is not speculation. That is the assessment of senior officials with direct knowledge of the intelligence. To understand why this matters so much, you need to understand what Russia brings to this equation that Iran simply does not have on its own. Iran operates only a handful of military-grade satellites and has no independent constellation of its own. Its overhead surveillance capability is limited. Russia, on the other hand, has spent years refining its targeting systems during the war in Ukraine. The Kremlin has built one of the most sophisticated target acquisition networks on the planet, a system that combines satellite imagery, electronic intelligence, and signals collection in ways that can identify and track moving military assets across vast distances. When that capability is pointed at American carrier strike groups and air wings operating in the Persian Gulf and the Red Sea, it becomes extraordinarily dangerous. Dara Masakot, a Russian military affairs expert at the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, put it plainly. The Iranians were hitting early warning radars. They were hitting long-range radar systems. They were targeting command and control nodes. They were doing this, she said, in a very directed, deliberate way. That level of precision does not come from Iranian organic intelligence collection alone. Nicole Grajewski, who studies Russian-Iranian cooperation at Harvard's Belfer Center, noted that the sophistication of Iran's retaliatory strikes appeared to have actually improved compared to the 12-day war Iran fought with Israel just months earlier. The Iranians were getting through American and Allied air defenses in ways that raised serious alarm. And here is the point that should make every strategic analyst sit up straight. That improvement did not happen in a vacuum. It happened at precisely the moment that Russia had every incentive in the world to make American military operations as costly and as complicated as possible. Let us back up and put this in its full historical context, because the irony here is almost too thick to process. Since Russia launched its full-scale invasion of Ukraine in February 2022, the axis of adversaries arrayed against American interests has operated in a very specific pattern. Iran gave Russia the technology to mass-produce cheap one-way attack drones, the Shahed series, which Moscow then used relentlessly to overwhelm Ukrainian air defenses and exhaust Western stocks of interceptors donated to protect Ukrainian cities. North Korea sent Russia artillery shells by the millions and eventually deployed ground troops to support Russian operations in Kursk. China provided dual-use goods, machine tools, and semiconductor components that fed Russia's defense industrial base. The United States, meanwhile, funneled tens of billions of dollars in military equipment to Ukraine and shared intelligence on Russian troop positions to sharpen Kyiv's ability to strike back. It was a proxy war, but the lines were clear. Now those lines have shifted, and they have shifted in a way that directly endangers American lives. The official American response to this revelation has been, to put it charitably, strange. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, when asked this week what message he had for Russia and China regarding their support for Iran, said he had no message and that they were not really a factor here. That statement is now extraordinarily difficult to defend in light of what 3 intelligence officials have confirmed. Russia is, by any reasonable definition, a factor, a very significant one. And yet, the administration chose to publicly minimize that reality, even as its own intelligence community was documenting it in classified assessments. The CIA and the Pentagon refused to comment. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov, contacted by the Washington Post, declined to address the intelligence findings and simply repeated Moscow's call for the war to end, calling it an unprovoked act of armed aggression. That framing from Moscow is worth noting. The Kremlin is publicly distancing itself from the conflict while privately helping prosecute it. That is the definition of a hybrid approach, and it is one the Kremlin has practiced extensively in other theaters. Here is where the operational consequences become very concrete. The Pentagon is burning through its stocks of precision-guided munitions and air defense interceptors at a pace that is raising serious alarms inside the military establishment. General Dan Kane, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, reportedly raised these concerns directly with President Trump before the operation was authorized. The administration has tried to downplay Kane's assessment, but the reality on the ground speaks for itself. Thousands of Iranian drones and hundreds of ballistic missiles have been fired. Each intercept costs money and depletes finite stockpiles. Each drone that gets through costs American lives and infrastructure. Every day this continues, the arithmetic gets harder for the American side, and Russia knows this perfectly well. The Post had previously reported that Moscow sees potential strategic advantages in a prolonged American-Iranian war. Higher oil prices, which fill Russian coffers as Western sanctions continue to bite. A severe crisis that pulls American and European attention and resources away from Ukraine, where the grinding conflict continues to consume enormous quantities of Western military support. A demonstration to the world that American military primacy has limits and that challenging it comes with manageable costs. Russia does not need to fire a single missile of its own to benefit from this war. All it needs to do is make sure Iran fights as effectively as possible for as long as possible, and that appears to be precisely what it is doing. 2 officials familiar with Russia's support told the Post that China, despite its close ties to both Russia and Iran, did not appear to be actively helping Tehran's defense operations. The Chinese embassy in Washington released a statement referencing Beijing's diplomatic outreach to regional partners and calling for the conflict to be immediately halted. That is a meaningfully different posture than Russia's. Beijing seems to be calculating that the risks of direct involvement outweigh the benefits, at least for now. Moscow has made a different calculation entirely. If you are finding this analysis valuable and you want to stay ahead of stories like this one, this is a good moment to subscribe to this channel, hit the bell icon, and leave a like on this video. We cover the geopolitical developments that shape the world, but rarely get the full treatment they deserve in mainstream news coverage. Every subscription helps us keep producing this kind of in-depth, independent analysis. Back to the map. The CIA station at the American Embassy in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, was struck in recent days. The agency confirmed this. That is not a random target. That is a high-value intelligence node, and hitting it requires either excellent organic intelligence collection by Iran or external assistance that allowed Iranian planners to identify and locate it. The targeting of American intelligence infrastructure in a third country is an escalation of a very different order than hitting military bases, and it points to a level of coordination and information sharing that goes well beyond what Iran could realistically accomplish independently. And then there is Ukraine, which enters this story in a way that few expected. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky posted on the social media platform X that the Trump administration had requested Ukraine's assistance in countering Iranian drones, and that Kyiv would provide specialists in response. Read that sentence again carefully. The country, whose cities have been shredded by Iranian-supplied drones operating in Russian hands, is now being asked to help the United States defend against the same technology. The circularity of that situation is extraordinary. Ukraine has more practical experience defeating Shahed-type drone swarms than almost any military on Earth, simply because Russian forces have used those weapons against Ukrainian targets so relentlessly over the past 3 years. That hard-won expertise now has direct application to the American campaign against Iran. And Zelensky, whatever his strategic calculations, apparently saw an opportunity to demonstrate Ukraine's value to an administration that has been deeply ambivalent about continued support for Kyiv. Masikot offered an important corrective to anyone tempted to read Russian involvement as a sign that the Kremlin is going all in on Iran's behalf. Russia, she noted, is likely making a very cold calculation that this is not fundamentally its war. Ukraine remains, by a wide margin, Moscow's #1 strategic priority. The Kremlin is not going to risk a direct military confrontation with the United States over Iran. What it will do is provide information that makes Iran a more effective adversary, extract maximum strategic benefit from American distraction and resource expenditure, and maintain plausible deniability the entire time. That is the playbook, and it is being executed with considerable sophistication. What does this mean for the trajectory of the conflict? Several things are worth watching closely. First, the question of how long Iran can sustain its offensive operations. The White House spokeswoman Anna Kelly said plainly that Iran's ballistic missile capacity is diminishing daily, its navy is being decimated, and its production infrastructure is being degraded. That is almost certainly true. American and Israeli strikes have reportedly hit more than 2,000 Iranian targets, including missile facilities, naval assets, and elements of the country's leadership structure. Iran's supreme leader was killed in the opening phase of the conflict. The regime is under unprecedented pressure. But a degraded Iran is not a defeated Iran. And as long as Russian intelligence continues to flow to Tehran's military planners, degraded Iranian forces can still inflict serious casualties. Second, the question of what happens to Russia's own calculation if the Iranian regime collapses entirely. The Post noted that Iran could become the latest country to lose a pro-Russian government. Following Syria's rebel takeover in late 2024 that toppled Bashar al-Assad, and the American military operation in January that resulted in the detention of Venezuelan President Nicolas Maduro. Each of those losses narrowed Moscow's network of aligned governments. A fundamentally transformed or collapsed Iranian government would be a significant strategic blow for the Kremlin, depriving it of a crucial partner in drone technology, regional disruption capabilities, and the diplomatic solidarity that has helped Moscow weather Western sanctions. That calculus may be part of why Russia is trying to help Iran fight more effectively, not because the Kremlin expects Iran to win, but because a longer, more costly war serves Russian interests even if the ultimate outcome is the same. Third, and perhaps most importantly for American domestic politics, is the question of what the administration does with this intelligence. 3 officials confirmed it to the Post. The CIA and Pentagon would not comment. The Defense Secretary publicly said Russia was not a factor. That disconnect between what the intelligence community knows and what senior officials are willing to say publicly is itself a story. It echoes patterns from other moments in recent American history where uncomfortable intelligence findings were set aside for political or diplomatic reasons. Whether that continues as the conflict develops, or whether the confirmation of Russian targeting assistance forces a public reckoning with the true shape of this war, will tell us a great deal about how this administration intends to manage a confrontation that is already far more complex and dangerous than its public framing has suggested. The bottom line is this: the United States is fighting a war in the Middle East. That war is being made more lethal by Russian intelligence assistance to the adversary. American soldiers have already died, in part because Iranian forces had better information about where to find them than they should have had on their own. The Pentagon is drawing down precision munition stockpiles. The Kremlin is publicly calling for peace while privately helping prosecute the conflict. And the official American government response is that Russia is not really a factor. At some point, that contradiction has to be addressed directly, because wars fought on the basis of incomplete or politically convenient narratives tend to produce outcomes nobody actually wanted. What do you think happens next? Does this confirmation of Russian involvement change the strategic calculus in Washington, or does the administration continue to minimize it? Let me know what you think in the comments below.